There's something about the first villain in an anime. Not the final boss, not the mastermind pulling the strings from the shadows, I mean the first real threat. The one that made the world feel dangerous. The one that told you this story isn't just about chasing dreams, it's about surviving them. For me it was Zabuza standing over a bridge in the mist, ruthless and cold. Or Arlong crushing Nami's hope like it was nothing. Even Orochimaru grinning his way through the shounen exams like a serpent in a horror movie. These characters weren't just the first villains, they were the first cracks in the world. They showed us the weight of pain, the cost of weakness, the danger of innocence. And even though the stories got bigger, the villains more ideological, the battles more explosive, I still think about the early villains, the ones that didn't need grand speeches, the ones that just showed up and changed everything. Most shonen stories start with a spark, a lighthearted tone, a few early wins. Sometimes even with a sense that the world isn't that dangerous. But then, someone shows up, someone dangerous, someone real. The first real villain arrives, and everything changes. Suddenly the world you're watching feels different, more fragile, more honest. Because now you know what's really at stake. For many of us that moment was Zabuza, the first major antagonist in Naruto. The first time a fight didn't feel like a spar but a battle, not just in scale but in weight. Zabuza wasn't there just to mess around, he wasn't some monster of the weak. He was brutal, precise, and unapologetic. He didn't hold back, he didn't play fair. He came to take their lives and he nearly succeeded. And that's what made him so terrifying, not just his strength but what he revealed. That being a shinobi meant dying young, killing without mercy, living without love. And just when we thought he was beyond redemption, he cried, he broke. He showed that even monsters had hearts. Zabuza taught us what Naruto was really about, not just ninjas and jutsu, but pain, trauma, cycles of violence, and the desperate hope to break them. And the same goes for Arlong in One Piece. Up until that point, the show had its moments of drama, but Arlong made it personal. He wasn't just strong, he was cruel. He didn't just beat people up, he owned them. And when we learn what he did to Nami, how he manipulated her, branded her, and broke her, things momentarily stopped feeling like an adventure, and instead started feeling like survival. And what made Luffy stand against him so powerful wasn't just the fight, it was the promise. The promise that no one would hurt Nami like that again. The promise that no one gets to treat his crewmates like that and walk away smiling. Zabuza and Arlong were two villains who arrived early, yet hit like final bosses. They didn't just shake the world, they defined it. Because a great first villain doesn't just raise the stakes, they tell you what kind of story you're really in. And if they introduce the idea of consequence, then Orochimaru and Crocodile solidified the idea of danger. Because they weren't just the first major villains, they were the first long-term threats. The kind that made you realize the world you were watching wasn't just dark, but it was deadly. Let's start with Orochimaru. When he shows up during the shounen exams, everything stops feeling safe. Not because he's loud or flashy, but because he knows too much. He's not just powerful, he's calculated, obsessed, and utterly inhuman in how he treats the people around him. Orochimaru is the moment Naruto's world stops being about grades and genin. It instead becomes a world where children are used, manipulated, and marked. Where power isn't just dangerous, it's also tempting. And Orochimaru isn't just a snake for show. He's the living embodiment of corruption that lives inside the system. He didn't just attack, he infiltrated. He broke the leaf from within. He defeated the Hokage, and worse, he began Sasuke's downfall. Not with violence, but with a whisper, saying you're not strong enough, so come with me. And Orochimaru isn't defeated in just one arc. He lingers, he stains every major decision from that point forward, and you feel his presence in the world long after he vanishes from the screen. Then there's Crocodile. One Piece had stakes before Alabasta, but Crocodile redefined them. He's not just a warlord, but he's a warlord with a plan. He's not attacking cities, but he's controlling them. From the shadows, with propaganda, with paranoia. And Luffy, we see him lose for the first time. Brutally and decisively. We see him laying in the sand, unable to do anything. Crocodile showed us that Luffy's willpower wasn't enough, that the world was bigger, colder, and smarter. And to win, he'd have to evolve. But what makes Crocodile and Orochimaru so important isn't just the scale of their plans. It's how they expose the cracks in the heroes. Orochimaru exploits Sasuke's insecurity, while Crocodile exploits Vivi's hope. They both threaten the very core of what our protagonists believe in. And that's why these early villains stand out. They don't just push the plot forward, but they redefine it. They're the point of no return, the moment the story commits to what it really is. And there's a good reason why these early villains leave such a deep mark. It's not just nostalgia, it's not just design. It's that they arrive when the story is still defining itself. And in doing so, they shape what the story becomes. Zabuza wasn't just a mission gone wrong. He was a reminder that being a ninja means killing, that even the bad guys have something to cry about, that this world Naruto stepped into, it isn't just a cartoon. It's a system of child soldiers and of broken men. A system where kindness can still exist even in the worst of people. Orochimaru wasn't just a villain, he was the dark side of legacy. He wasn't trying to end the world, he just wanted to keep on living no matter what the cost. He twisted the idea of purpose. He made Sasuke feel like he had to be stronger at any cost. And by doing that, he didn't just threaten Naruto's friend, he threatened Naruto's entire dream of saving him. Then there's Arlong, who wasn't just another pirate. He was the first time One Piece asked, what does freedom cost someone who's not free? He turned Nami's childhood into a prison. He bought her silence. He mocked Luffy's ideals. And when Luffy punched through his tower, it wasn't about treasure. It was about setting Nami free. And finally there's Crocodile. He wasn't just strong, but he was also a strategist. He showed that the world doesn't care about your ambition. That villains wear suits, they run countries. That justice isn't always on the Marines' side. And that the Grand Line wasn't going to wait for Luffy to grow up. These early villains matter because they introduce not just conflict but clarity. They tell you what the story is really about, and they do it before the story knows how to say it out loud. Before Naruto can preach about peace, Zabuza makes you understand the cost of violence. Before One Piece can build a world of warlords and empires, Crocodile makes you feel what happens when one man controls hope. They're not just first bosses, but they're tone setters. They carve out the emotional blueprint that everything else will echo, and they haunt the story long after they're gone. As stories evolve, so do their villains. They stop being roadblocks and start being reflections. By the time you meet a Pain, a Doflamingo, or a Madara, the story has already stretched out. The characters have grown and the questions have gotten bigger. You're no longer just fighting to survive, you're fighting for ideals. Pain isn't scary only because he's strong, he's scary because he kind of makes sense. He takes Naruto's dream and warps it, shows him that peace has a price, that forgiveness has its limits, and that sometimes villains cry louder than the heroes. In a similar sense, Doflamingo isn't just iconic because he's evil, he's iconic because he explains that evil. He was born a celestial dragon, then thrown into the wolves. He's not just cruel, he's what happens when the world teaches you that cruelty is power. He's the violence of the system in a refined version. And when Luffy fights him, it's not just a battle, it's a rejection of that entire system. It's a line drawn in the sand saying that we're not letting monsters like you run the world anymore. Later villains come with ideologies. They're more talkative, more philosophical. They don't just punch, but they challenge your ideals. And that's not a flaw, because by then you've seen enough fists fly. And what you want is meaning. These villains aren't always scarier, but they're heavier, because now the story is bold enough to say something, and they're the ones forcing that conversation. But here's the thing, those moments only land because of what came before. Because the early villains, the Zabuzas, the Arlongs, the Orochimarus, and the Crocodiles, they laid the emotional groundwork. They showed us what it feels like to lose, what it means to be powerless. They gave us the gut punch, so when the big questions come later about pain, about peace, and about justice, we're not just hearing ideas, but we're feeling the echoes. Those early villains didn't just make the world feel real, they made the stakes feel personal. So when the later villains do show up with ideologies, we already know what those ideas can cost. And that's what makes the journey work. The danger gets bigger, the questions get louder, but the stakes, they started long ago, and they never really left. We never really forget the first real villains of the story, because they're the first to show us that the story has teeth. They flip the tone, they raise the stakes, they tell us that the world has pain in it. And if you want to move forward, you'll have to feel it. Zabuza wasn't just a mercenary, he was a mirror to what being a shinobi meant. And when he cried at the end, it broke something in us as well. And Arlong wasn't just an evil pirate, he was One Piece's portrayal of oppression. And when Nami asked for help and Luffy gave her his hat, that moment became history. And then the villains such as Orochimaru and Crocodile, they didn't just challenge the heroes, they defined the worlds they walked into. But here's what makes anime storytelling so rich. It's that the villains evolve with the story. You start with fear, with raw primal danger, and you end up with ideology. With villains who don't just threaten the hero's life, but they threaten their beliefs. These villains give us the shock, the weight, the realization that this isn't just a game. And once these stories introduced their first real villain, they never went back to being the same. They grew darker, deeper, and better. And we felt the weight of it every step of the way. And that's where I'll end off this week's video. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know what you thought down in the comments below. I really appreciate all the support I've been receiving so far, and I'll continue making these weekly anime analysis videos. So if you do enjoy them, feel free to like and subscribe. So once again, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you all next week.